All right, everyone. First of all, I want to welcome you to what I hope will be a very informative and educational workshop for you. I really appreciate, I've done this 12 different times around the state, and this is the first time when I've had the number of county commissioners in the audience, and this is what this is actually geared for. And because it's geared for you, given your busy schedules, it's at the 10,000 foot level. It is not down in the weeds. This is an overview of this process right here, and it's applicable to any county in the state of Florida, DeSoto, Hardy, or anywhere else that you're from. I've been in public service for 32 and a half years. I just retired in 2006. I worked for the state of Florida for 32 and a half years. The last 25 years of that, I was in the Florida Division of Emergency Management. The last 12 years of that, I was the Bureau Chief of Recovery and Mitigation. So those of you that have experienced Charlie, Francis, Faye, all of these hurricanes that have come through your communities, and you've struggled with trying to get your FEMA reimbursements back, I'm the guy at the state level that managed that entire program for the state of Florida for over 12 years. So I'm not FEMA, I'm Florida. I was Florida. After that, I left the state of Florida and went to work for L3 Communications, which is one of the Beltway bandits up in Washington, D.C., pretty much doing the same thing for them. I stayed with them for 2 years and then now have worked for Disaster Strategies and Ideas for the last 4 years, doing things like this. We also are working directly with all of the counties from Hurricane Wilma forward. Disaster Strategies and Ideas is the contractor for the state of Florida that is doing all of the recovery reimbursement work for the state. So anytime you see one of these state people come into your office trying to look for documentation, they're one of us. So I think I can speak with a little bit of authority on the subject. These were my programs when I was at the state. All of these wind mitigation programs. Also, I was over the flood mitigation programs, but we're here only today to talk about wind mitigation because that's how this program is funded. In one of the programs I'm going to talk to you about actually provided the funds for me to go around and do this for you. So given that introduction, let's go ahead and get started today. This is your agenda for today. We're basically going to walk through what are these programs. First thing we're going to do is talk about why do you think you would need to even pay attention to this today. I'm going to show you a lot of disaster stuff that has happened in this state from some very recent events and talk to you about had there been the opportunity for you to have had wind mitigation in place, some of these damages would not have occurred. We're going to go through all of that. We're going to look at all of the programs the state currently has that can fund you, provide funds to the county for wind mitigation. All right? There's cycles that they run through. There's different pots of money with different strings that are attached to each pot of money. We'll talk about those, and then we'll talk about some real-life success stories so you can actually see facilities that have been retrofitted for wind mitigation. For those of you that are watching this on the video teleconference, you're actually going to hear interviews of people that have had their facility retrofitted. So that's what you're here for today. We're going to look at why is the course important. We've already talked about this. Let's go on. There's going to be 4 things I'm going to ask of each of these programs. And hopefully they would have been the questions that you would have asked. What are the wind mitigation requirements? What do I need to do? If I want to take advantage of this, what is it that I need to do? How are the ways that I can implement this? We're going to look at pots of money. We're going to look at funds. We're going to look at the planning that some of this mitigation material is in. And we're going to look at one state statute that requires wind mitigation. So we'll look at 3 or 4 different ways in which you can invoke mitigation. If there are incentives, what are they? And what's the benefit to the county? The course objectives, if you just revert and look at what I just said, that's what I'm hoping that you'll leave here with. My ultimate goal is that you will be dangerously empowered to understand these programs so that you can go back to your particular locale, if you're here or in DeSoto County, and consider going after some of these funds. Obviously, you have to have a point person. And here, again, this is why it's so important. Most counties that I go to, the emergency management director is that point person because they understand this world. They work in it every day. Not necessarily them personally that will go for the grant, but I've seen more cases than not they are. This was, I was the Bureau Chief of Operations during Hurricane Andrew. Were any of y'all in Florida when Hurricane Andrew came through? Did you have any impacts from it? Zero. That's an important point. If you were north of Palm Beach County, you had zero impacts, but yet that's the second most costly natural disaster in the history of the United States. Basically a very localized area. It was basically a wind event, a very short duration of time. You had well over 200,000 people displaced. If you think about that for a minute, as the operations chief, it fell on me to look at what do you do with 200,000 people who, after a 4-hour event, no longer have a place to go home to. What do you do? What would you do here? Obviously, the numbers are different here, but if you did have a large event and you did have a lot of personal property damage, what are some of the options that you would take? What if you could prevent that? That's why we're here. What if you could prevent, this is a mobile home park of about 1,100 units. This is just one square area of it, of which 900 were totally destroyed or made uninhabitable. Water driven, you don't have that concern here, but again, it's wind. Wind pushes the water. Water does a lot of damage. You all certainly have a lot of low-lying areas in the floodplain here. I'm sure you are well aware of that as the planner, the growth management guru. You know where the 100-year floodplains are, and you know what the structures are in that floodplain and could flood. All right? One of the other things it does, large disasters disrupt the economy. If you can follow this, it's almost like clockwork. If you look at the current events that are happening in New York City and New Jersey, the very first thing you started hearing grumbles about up there was what? Where's the power? Where's the power? All right? Emergency management, we have this time called the honeymoon period. You've got 72 hours to get your act together. Everybody loves everybody in that 72 hours. After that, no power, no food, no water, no nothing. That welcome gets worn mighty thin. Government has to be present and waving the flag starting the 73rd hour, or you're going to have a lot of problems, and which you started to hear up there. The next thing you started to hear was, and you're going to hear this a lot starting now, why can't I put my home back the way it was? Well, because there's this thing now called floodplain ordinances. 50% destroyed, you have to put it back to current code. Well, current code says jack it up in the air to get it out of the way of the storm surge. That's the next great big hurdle you're going to start hearing up there in New York. The other thing was, why is everything seemingly taking so long? Why does it take so long for the National Guard to give out food? Why does it take this? Why does it take that? Because the area is so huge. You've got the opposite effect here, but your problem here is because you're a smaller county, more or less centralized in the middle of the state, getting the resources here to you could always be a challenge. Once they get here, you'll be fine. 25% of the businesses that were impacted in Andrew never came back online. That's a huge, huge impact to that local economy. Hurricane Wilma, y'all went through parts of Hurricane Wilma here because it came in Collier and exited over in Palm Beach. How many of y'all lost power here, way this far north? Anybody? Okay. Well, Wilma caused more power outage technically than Sandy did. A lot of people don't realize Wilma was an immensely expensive storm. It ties more or less with Andrew in terms of the cost. Only Katrina costs more than Wilma did. Wilma was kind of a sleeper. It came in Collier, exited the other side of the state, but the problem was the power grid. Virtually every pole that Progress Energy, Florida Power and Light, all of them had were on the ground. And all of a sudden, nobody had power for some people for up to 4 weeks. You cannot affect an effective recovery operation without power. It's the most important thing you can get back online. Once you have power and Walmart and the Waffle House open, you're good to go. If you don't have those 3 things going, you got a problem. You all had Francis here. It impacted you. So you've got 3 things that always you have to be concerned about. You're going to have impacts to infrastructure, you're going to have impacts to people, and you're going to have impacts to the economy. This whole approach to this is, what if you could mitigate 5, 10, or 15% of that impact? Would that be of interest to you? If you could reduce the overall impact of a disaster, is that something that would be of interest to you, especially you commissioners? You are charged, the County Board of County Commissioners is charged in Florida Statute 252 to provide for the welfare and the safety of the residents in your county. You are technically, ultimately responsible for this. The buck stops with you. You delegate that responsibility to whoever you delegate it to, but by Florida statute, and there it is right there, you are required to provide for this level of safety for the people who reside in your county. That's important. A lot of people don't know there is a section in Chapter 252 devoted to nothing but counties and all of the rules and regulations and responsibilities that you have with disasters. You new guys, you definitely need to read that because it guides you and tells you the extraordinary authority you have during that time. It waives a lot of stuff that you normally have to go through very elaborate procurement processes for. You can so choose to waive all of that in a local state of emergency. All of that is spelled out in Chapter 252.38. FEMA claims that for every dollar you spend in mitigation that you're going to get a $3 to $4 payback. The problem with mitigation is it's tough because you commissioners are going to be balancing budgets. You're going to be constantly pulled one way or the other, having one entity want funds, and you have to make the choices on who does not, and what levels. Even though mitigation is incredibly effective and can go a long way, some of these programs I'm going to talk to you about come with a cost share. And you would have to make that decision. Is it worth the county's time and expense to put up the cost share? But I'm going to show you ways to where your dollar output is minimized by a lot. You're either going to be a villain or you're going to be a hero. I always put this up because I've seen disasters kill elected officials. If you do not get out in front of the disaster and be the flag waver for your residents to see, who are they going to blame? You know? I have seen, because I've been in this business for a long, long time, I've seen a lot of people come to the end of their political careers because of disasters, because they didn't know what to do and did not go after things that they could have gone after. So it's kind of like, I always use the old castor oil commercial, pay me now or pay me later. It is so worthwhile for you to understand how these processes work. You're not the ones who are going to run them. You're going to have staff do that. But you need to understand what these programs are. So again, I'm glad that you're here. I always put this up just to remind people that it doesn't matter where you live in Florida, you will be impacted by a natural disaster, especially a hurricane. I focus on a hurricane for this course because it generates the biggest wind field. Where else can you get wind? You can get them in winter storms, you can get them in tornadoes, you can get them in a bad thunderstorm. But I'm focusing on a large event that the state gets declared a presidential disaster declaration, because many of these programs are activated only during a presidential disaster declaration. Not all of them, but some of them are. So again, also on this, don't focus on the little the little line. You see how big these wind bands are? Don't think that you've skirted the event, because even 40, 50, 60 mile an hour winds anywhere is going to cause some problems. A lot of people say it's not on my watch, I'm not going to be concerned about it, I'm going to retire at the end of my term. Well, that's the history of Florida and hurricanes for the last 170 years. So obviously it's just not a matter of when this is going, if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when it will happen. So we live in a very, very hurricane active area here. I bring this up to show you there is a tremendous resource. If you go online to the Florida Division of Emergency Management's website, this report was created by them, and it was designed to look at the extent of vulnerability that every county has in the state of Florida. When this was done in 2009, the state had a $1.3 trillion exposure. That's a lot. That's huge. And it also breaks it down by county. So you can go online and pull up DeSoto or Hardy County and look at the exposure to infrastructure that you have to a certain different levels of hurricanes. It's pretty interesting reading. Virtually 80% of everybody lives within 10 miles of the coastline in our state. You all obviously, how far is the Atlantic to the east of y'all? About 80 miles, 100 miles, and the Gulf to the west? 45 miles? So you're obviously, you're 100 miles one way and 45 miles the other way, so you're not out of harm's way by any sense of the imagination. But you are an inland county. You're not going to have to worry about storm surge here. You have a lot of people that live in very highly hazardous areas. Obviously, this slide is more for the coastal counties, because you've got 35 coastal counties. Over 80% of everybody that lives in the state of Florida lives in those 35 counties. Historical impacts. Hurricane Andrew was technically, it made landfall at 5:01 in the morning. It exited around Naples at 9 o'clock. So you're looking at a 4-hour wind event. And these are the numbers. That's what a 4-hour wind event did. You had almost 30,000 homes destroyed, 107,000 that were damaged, 180,000 people left homeless, 82,000 businesses destroyed, and on it goes. 31 schools never reopened because they were so badly destroyed. Obviously, those kinds of impacts are not going to happen in rural communities, but I just show you that Hurricane Andrew was a 2-county event. It was Dade and it was Broward. By the time it went over the Everglades and exited in around Naples and Collier County. It did not have the punch that it did until it exited the Gulf. And where did it go? All you historians that have been around a while.
Louisiana, didn't it?
Went to Louisiana and caused a huge amount of destruction up there. So it was a double state impact. A lot of times our hurricanes will exit the Gulf and then come up and hit us up in the Panhandle. $41 billion of damage in today's dollars. So that's putting it up there pretty high in the rankings in terms of overall damages. All right, that's what a hurricane can do. So our job is we've got to do something about mitigating some of those impacts. All right? Hurricane Ivan, I put this in because a lot of people up in the Panhandle think they never get impacted. Hurricane Ivan was a mess. It absolutely destroyed Escambia and Santa Rosa counties, big time. Had major, major impacts up there at all levels of government, at all the municipalities. And you can see the statistics there for what happened with them. Hurricane Wilma, people just don't realize how massive and big the impacts were for Hurricane Wilma. 6 million people lost power. That's a lot of folks. That is a lot of folks. And if you think about you cannot effectively recover without power, you can see the daunting task that was before the state and the Public Service Commission and all of the private suppliers to get things back in order. When you disrupted that many people in Andrew, the only options we had back then were to set up tent cities, which is no longer a viable option. You'll never put people in tents. If you think about when Andrew made impact, it was in August. What's August like down here?
The worst.
All right? What if you were inside of a dark green olive tent with no windows in August and it rains every day? These people were miserable, but that's all they had because at that time, there was no temporary disaster housing program. There was no way to effectively put people anywhere except into HUD housing. Well, guess what? HUD housing was destroyed too. So where did people go? They went to tents. Nowadays, what will happen is they will actually come in and establish travel trailers. First thing they're going to do is give people a voucher to go to a hotel. Or FEMA will actually pay for the people to go to a hotel. That's the first option in communities where there are a lot of options to consider. The second thing they will do, and especially if you're in the floodplain, is bring in a travel trailer. Because you can put a travel trailer in somebody's front yard while they repair their home. FEMA will do that. The last thing they want to do is to bring in mobile homes. Why do you suppose they do not like to bring in mobile homes?
They never leave.
That's one problem. That's a serious problem. He said they never leave. That is often the mobile home people go into is better than what it was they had before the disaster, and asking them to leave that facility is difficult. The main reason FEMA doesn't like to do it is the cost. Somebody venture a guess of what it costs to set up one of these travel trailers. Anybody got any ideas? I'm talking about setting up the park, bringing in the mobile homes, doing all the things that you need to do to meet your local codes, issue a certificate of occupancy, putting the people in there. How much do you think it costs the federal government to do that?
Per unit?
Per unit.
30 grand.
30 grand?
Yeah, I was gonna say about probably 80
Cost
to
per
90.
unit?
Bingo. $85,000 per unit. So these are the things that disasters cause, all right? Opportunities. When I talk about wind mitigation, what am I talking about? These are just examples of some of the things that you can do in order to affect wind mitigation. Obviously, the new Florida Building Code has a lot of wind mitigation built into it. You have to build to the current code, all right? The current code has ingrained some pretty good wind mitigation things. I'm talking about putting a stronger roof on the facility than what it had. Go to Code Plus. I'm talking about the plans that we're going to be looking at here in a minute. Window glazing, window replacements. Excellent, excellent mitigation opportunity. The problem with when you have a compromised structure, wind or door, what happens? What is technically happening? You mechanics around here, what happens when you blow the window in or the door in? What all of a sudden wants to go up? Why? Hydraulic pressure. Same thing that your car jack, your car lift, exact same thing. As the window is compromised and the wind goes in, it's just like you've got a hydraulic jack on the inside, and you'll notice the roofs literally start lifting up. Once they lift up, then the wind catches them and blows them sideways. But the first physical action that's occurring is a hydraulic uplift. So that's why you need to protect your windows, garage doors, and doors. All right, hurricane tie downs in the joists. It is so cheap to put those things in and so effective. I think they're a requirement of the new building code. You can go in and retrofit facilities and put those clips in, and it like quadruples the wind load capacity of a roof by simply putting in those little hurricane clips. These are actual examples off of the website. I know you can't read it from where you're sitting, but you can do a lot of different things with these programs that I'm talking to you about. And these are just actual things that were used. You can even put in early warning systems. What is that doing? It's mitigating the loss of life through early warning. You can put in retrofit your shutters or your public buildings, courthouses, window glazing on the windows, shuttering. Shutters are awesome. So there's just a lot of things that you can do in order to protect yourself from wind. Obviously, the most important thing you can do, the cheapest thing in most cases, are shutters. All right, some of these programs will give you 75% of federal dollars to put shutters on facilities. All right, the other 25%, what's called the non-federal share, is something that you would have to come up with, but you can use in-kind forces to offset the monetary part of that cost share. So if you got a $100,000 grant, your cost share would be $25,000. What I'm saying is, in many cases, you can offset that $25,000 obligation on your part through using county staff, using county supplies. There are ways to offset the cash outflow. That's why I'm saying, don't be shocked by this cash match stuff, because there's ways to meet it without breaking the bank. It's not talking about pure cash dollars. Window glazing, obviously, excellent, excellent protection. And every building I'm showing you is something that's been done with this program in the state of Florida. Mobile home tie downs. There's a program set up in the state under the Residential Construction Mitigation Program, RCMP, that they can actually send crews into a county, look at the current standards and sustainability of mobile home tie downs, and if they're under code, they can bring them up to current code in terms of tying them down and making them more secure. It doesn't matter if your mobile home is tied down securely. If your mobile home isn't tied down securely and yours blows apart, where does your stuff go? Comes over here. So you want to have a global impact. One P-rock blowing off of some roof somewhere, blowing through a window, I don't care if you're built to 500 mile-an-hour wind codes. If your window is busted, you're out of luck. And a P-rock on a roof. We've gone up and actually secured the P-rocks on the roofs as a wind mitigation measure. These are some of the things these programs can do. Roofing, okay? All right, Putting in the straps, incredibly important. The goal is to take the wind load from the roof to the foundation, make it transfer through the post and lintel that you have in your construction. The more you put in, the more secure that your facilities are going to be. Pretty hard to retrofit that. You know, once the structure is built, you can do it in the roof. You obviously cannot do it in the walls. But these are things that you can encourage people to do. All right, we're going to look at these couple of things here. I'm going to run you quickly through the plans that you have in place in this county that deal with some of these programs. In your book, next to the last or somewhere in your facility, everything that I'm about to talk to you about is summarized in 2 pages. I call it at a glance. It's in there, all of these programs, and I've got 1 to 2 sentences that explain them. You've got it somewhere in there. I think it's near the back. Page 19, okay. And you can look at these programs. If you forget what it is I'm about to tell you about and you're interested in it, the first thing you ought to do is go call your emergency management director, because they pretty much know these programs. But if you're personally interested in them and you want to Google them, you want to do the research, that at a glance, that thing that's there in your document, is basically a 1 to 2 sentence summary of everything I'm about to tell you. You have quite a few plans here in the county. Hardy and DeSoto County have approved comprehensive emergency management plans. They have to have them. They have to be reviewed every 4 years. They have to be updated. There is still a requirement in the comprehensive plan. There is a section dealing with mitigation. It's more of the how-to kind of situation. You have other mitigation plans that deal with who, what, where, when, and how. But until the county changes how it reviews plans and the issuance of new review criteria, which I understand are coming out shortly, this is still a requirement that every comprehensive emergency management plan has a whole chapter in there dealing with mitigation, right? Yours has one, okay? And that deals with a lot of how and who and where and when and what of mitigation. So the first thing you'd want to look at if you're interested in this, get your county emergency management director to brief you on all of the mitigation things that you've got on the books now. The other thing that you've got is something called a local mitigation strategy. That too is a requirement that the state put in place. That is great. That is probably the most important document in this field that you have. And why is it so important? It's important because everything from this point forward that I talked to you about, if you do not have an approved, up-to-date local mitigation strategy, FEMA will not give you $1. Neither will the state of Florida. They put a heavy emphasis on what we call the LMS, Local Mitigation Strategy. In both of your counties, that was developed probably through a committee, and you probably have a standing local, do you have a task force or a group that gets together every so often? Okay, all right. And what they're doing when they get together in this local mitigation strategy are a list of projects, basically prioritized, waiting to be funded through some of these programs or through a presidential disaster declaration.
My name is William Merrill. I'm a civil structural engineer with Rebuild Northwest Florida. At Rebuild, we do literally thousands of pre-inspection retrofits, and what we found is after the hurricanes, a lot of people went out and did a lot of their own mitigation. And most of what we find, if it was not permitted, most of it's not done properly and isn't offering the level of protection it requires. And that's what I would say is the building departments need to be very familiar with mitigation, need to have processes in place to allow mitigation type permits to come through and be able to understand it. And that's well before the storm ever comes, because one of the first things people do after the storm is they want to go mitigate their home. And a lot of times They do it either with contractors that aren't licensed or are not getting permits, or they're doing it themselves. And educating people that they need to pull permits is very important to really getting the level of mitigation that it needs. This is a home that's actively undergoing its mitigation. They're putting shutters on the house, a new garage door. We have some guys over here getting ready to put the gable-end bracing and sheathe them up, and it should be done in a couple of days. After Ivan, probably the wind damage, structural wind damage that we saw most were gables that blew out. And most of those gables didn't have a sheathing material behind the gable. In other words, it could have been just vinyl over maybe some thin insulation board or even some fabric. Those blow out in pretty large numbers. What happens then is it pressurizes the attic and you get all sorts of damage. One of the things we do is remove the vinyl and place a solid sheathing behind it, and that's what these guys are doing. They actually have already put the sheathing and they're replacing the vinyl right now. You know, what we found with all of our inspections when we find existing shutters or existing products is that if they weren't permitted, they probably weren't installed properly most of the time, because there's more wrong ways to do this than right, and that's true across the board with mitigation. So having a building department that understands mitigation and understands the techniques. You know, this window, as you see, these are standard panel shutters. We've got these pins here, and what happens is the panel, whether it be steel or Lexan or even fabric, will slide under this channel and get fastened and bolted down. Now what's critical are these fastening bolts, so this track actually go into the host structure. And if that's going through brick, that means several inches through the brick and through an air gap, and actually has to tie into the host structure. Probably the most common mistake we've seen with shutters is that they're installed straight into brick facade, or the bolts are too short, and it's a very common problem.
If the project is not listed in that local mitigation strategy, you can add it in later, but it is much better to have it in up front. So you already have, right now, both of your counties have a list of projects that this committee has identified that if they had the funds, they could implement now and mitigate whatever it is that they're trying to mitigate. This document is incredibly important. I cannot emphasize enough. Not only that is, it will give you a very detailed analysis of every hazard that your county is susceptible to. Everything. It will give you dollar impacts. If that event happened, what would be the dollar impact to my counties? All right, there are no funding incentives available, except you get no funds without having one and having it approved and having it up to date. I was working with a county to the northwest of you. They fell behind their update due schedule. They were supposed to have an update in by January of this year. They didn't get it till about August. Well, somewhere around June, July, they had one of these events. What was it, Isaac or Debbie? Somebody, they got impacted. They technically were not eligible for any mitigation dollars because they did not have an up-to-date approved local mitigation strategy. I talk about that plan a lot because it carries a tremendous amount of weight for you. So if you're not familiar with it, and if you want to know anything natural hazard-wise about your county, get a copy of it and just look at it. Most of them are too big to read, but I've already talked to you about the CEMP. You all do still have comp plans, correct? Growth management plans, all right? And within those comp plans, many times, obviously on the coastal areas, there's a coastal element. Well, you're not a coastal county, so you don't have those coastal elements in there, but there are still provisions in the comp plan that can be used to offset mitigation impacts, if you so chose to do that. And the problem with that is, you're taking a little heat for doing it, but for the good and for the long-term good of the county, it is a tool at your disposal that you could insert language into your local comp plan Now this is stuff guided by Chapter 163 of Florida statutes, 163, 168, and 338. All right, this is different from Chapter 252 in the emergency management world. So your growth management person, and here in this county, it's you, right?
Well, I'm one of them.
One of
Kevin
them.
is the director, yes.
Okay. Every county has an entity like this. And they're the ones who have to maintain this thing, this comp plan. This is just something that is not required by the state, and let me tell you the genesis of where this thing came from. After Hurricane Hugo, the state of Florida, I was at that time the chief of recovery and mitigation, they sent me up to Charleston, South Carolina to look at lessons learned. Because you remember in '89, they got clobbered. Absolutely clobbered up there in Charleston and really North Charleston up to Bulls Bay, Sullivan's Island, Myrtle Beach, all the way up to Myrtle Beach. There was a community up there called Mount Pleasant. It was on the landward side of their coastal barrier network up there, Sullivan's Island, Pawleys Island. The city commissioners of Mount Pleasant didn't want reconstruction going back just the way it was before Hugo. Why did they not want that? It would happen next time they had Hugo. What they wanted to do was to impose a building moratorium long enough before they could get some outside help to come in and strengthen the local building code. How popular was the city commission? They weren't very popular, all right? But they did the right thing. If you go up to Mount Pleasant today, a lot of the regrowth that happened after hurricane is a direct result of that action that they took. They are much more protected now from wind and wave than they were before that. But they had to bite the bullet at the time, and they imposed a short-term building moratorium until they could look at their code. That's the genesis of where this plan comes from. That does the same thing today, before you have that event. So you can have public hearings, have vettings, get public feedback, input, so that everybody knows what it is that you say you're going to do after the next large event. You're not doing it at that time, you're doing it now. That's the genesis of what these post-disaster redevelopment plans are all about. It's a voluntary thing to do. Nobody has to do it. There was a pilot program that funded about 5 counties. They're all online. If you want to look at one, including Polk County, if you want to go online and pull it down and look at it, they've got some pretty interesting ideas in that plan of things that they would invoke immediately after a natural disaster. And what does that do? Instead of you taking the heat, you point to that plan and says, that plan that you all had a part of developing is now in effect, and I'm more or less bound to a plan that was developed and vetted through the public. Takes all the heat off of you post-event. So if you wanted and got that aggressive and really wanted to get into this is mitigation, this is what I would call advanced mitigation right here. You can really do a lot of cool things in this plan, but again, it's voluntary. But there's guidance on how to write one of these things at a website. If you will just Google post-disaster redevelopment plan, it will bring you up to a website that has an excellent, excellent criteria for how to develop one of these plans. All right, the first program we're going to talk about is probably where most of the money is for what I've been talking about. There's 2 major sources of funds. This is one of them. This is called the 404 Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This is the program that kicks in after you have a presidential disaster declaration. In the state of Florida, if you added up everything that it costs to put the infrastructure back together, everything that it costs to make the people okay, individual assistance, and everything that the Small Business Administration spends, and they'll spend a lot. You add up those three total sums of money, multiply it by 20%. That is what then funds the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. It is a program that is generated after a presidential disaster declaration. When you add up those three programs, their total outflow of cash, times it by 20%, you get that pot of money on top of everything else you've gotten to do specific mitigation measures. This is a very, very important program. This is the program that's going to primarily fund the projects that you have listed in your local mitigation strategy. That's why, unless you have a local mitigation strategy that is up to, it's been updated and it's been approved, you cannot take advantage of this kind of money. So the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is extremely, extremely beneficial to you. All right, are there strings attached? Yes. There is this is one of those 25%, 75% cost share programs. The feds will come in and give you 75%, 75% of all this money. In the old days, the state used to kick in 12.5% and you would kick in 12.5%. But the state, a couple years ago, during one of their budget crises, said, no, we're not going to kick in our 12.5%. So all of that shifted to the applicant. That's you, local government. All right? So you're responsible for the 25% non-federal share. But I'll tell you here in a minute how you can get around that. You can do amazing things with this pot of money. If you wanted to retrofit every public structure that you've got, you could. Jill, did you ever upgrade your EOC with any of this money?
The last thing I'm aware of is the fire department retrofit the windows.
Okay, the fire department retrofitted their windows. A lot of fire departments will retrofit the garage doors because the flimsiest part of your house is what? It's the garage door. It's, metal that thin. You can push it in with your hand in most cases. So a lot of times you can upgrade the bay doors of the fire department. Most of the times what I've seen them done, and that's why I put the picture on top, the top two things they do is shutters and roof improvements. So this pot of money can be used for that. Again, this is something that will be identified in your local mitigation strategy. So today, you could go to Jill and ask to see a copy, if you're in this county, Hardy County, say, I want to look at our local mitigation strategy. She'll show you the copy of the plan, and in there somewhere is going to be a list of projects. You new guys, you new commissioners ought to look at that. You ought to update and look at that list of projects ever so often. It may not be what you want to do. You're the current guys in charge. You should be responsible for looking at that. And that's why they have, in most counties, they have a committee. It's called the Local Mitigation Task Force, Planning Group, Working Group, whatever. And they always hope and invite at least the county administrator or a county commissioner to chair or sit on that committee, and for that very reason. All right, because Florida has an enhanced mitigation plan, that's why we get the 20%. If you do not have an enhanced plan at the state level, you only get 15%. But the state of Florida has an enhanced plan, so we get 20%. Every county, every applicant is eligible for 20% of their disaster costs. That's roughly how the money gets divvied up. If you think about how does this great big pot of money get divided, what the state did is basically say if you add up all your Hardy counties, DeSoto counties, costs to repair the infrastructure, costs that were associated with putting people back whole, and all of your SBA expenditures that the Small Business Administration will spend in your county, you add them up times 20, that's the pot of money that you would get to work with. The state will do those calculations for you and tell you pretty much this is how much money you're eligible for. So that's very, very helpful. And they have a tiered system. They have 3 tiers. The first tier is you're a declared county, you get 20% of your damages. The second tier is you're a neighbor county, all right? You here don't want to use your money. Other people in declared counties could then get hold of your money and it will be diverted and affect their projects. The third tier is, I'm in Escambia County, but I've got a great project. If all of the declared counties cannot use their particular pots of money, the state can shift it to a non-declared county because you all can't use it. And that happens a lot, unfortunately. A lot of this money in declared counties never gets used for all the, for a bunch of reasons, but all right, ways around the match. I already talked a little bit about this. There is a thing called global match that FEMA doesn't really like to talk about a lot. We invented global match here in Florida. What global match says is, let's say you've got a similar project that you have funded with county funds. You can offset your cost share obligation by claiming that project as your cost share. Now, there are all kinds of strings and regulations that go with that. It has to be within the same fiscal year. It has to be a project that would literally be run through the hazard mitigation grant program process. It used to be pretty free. When we created this thing here in Florida and it got replicated in other states, the original rules were pretty loose. It was anything that DOT did to clear a swale, to grade a road, anything that your county works departments did that we could claim as a mitigation measure, we would grab hold of that as offset to this pot of money. FEMA came back and said, no, that's a little too loosey-goosey. We're going to tighten the screws down a little bit, and they did. It's not impossible to still use it that way. You could literally do this with no cash outflow on your part, but you've got to know how to do it. And that's why I say your emergency management folks, and not even they understand all of this, but they're the ones who you would probably lean on to help guide you through this process. But there is a way to grab 75% of these dollars and you put in $0. All right, this program here is one that is very, very important. And Jill, really, this is, if you don't understand any of the other ones, this one you really need to grab hold of. This is the 406 mitigation program. Now, in Hurricane Charlie, Hardy and DeSoto counties were declared, right? You were in a presidential disaster declaration, and you got this thing called public administration. This is the thing that allows you to fix your infrastructure. The public administration program has 8 categories of eligibility. They call it category A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. It covers everything that you could possibly think of from an infrastructure point of view. FEMA will say, we will come in and fix it if you can plug your project into one of these categories. Okay, that's a 50,000 foot level explanation of how that works. And for you today, that's really all you need to know. There is money that FEMA's going to give you to repair all your infrastructure, and you just have to plug it into a category of eligibility. When you do that, and this is completely up to you, in most cases, FEMA will not guide you down this road. You can build in to the project mitigation enhancements. Now, a couple of reasons why this is incredibly important. This program, the state matches with 12.5%. So now you're at 87.5% eligibility. You're only responsible for 12.5% on this program. Example, this has to be specific to a facility, a structure, a something. The roof blows off this building. Instead of replacing it with the same kind of roof it's got and have it blow off again, let's replace it with one of them new fancy metal roofs that, you know, has a higher wind load. All right? The cost difference between replacing what was and replacing what you want, that span is what this program funds. That's called 406 mitigation. You just have to document that it's cost beneficial. There are no limits on this program. If your mitigation measure is costing you more than the repairs, well, then FEMA's going to start, let's look at this. But I mean, there are no limits on this. I've seen structures where windows needed to be replaced. Well, they replaced them with film, shutters, whatever. That difference between replacing what was, put it back to pre-disaster condition, to what is 406 mitigation. Only you push that button. And the reason it doesn't get pushed enough is because not enough people understand how it works. If you wait till the project's underway, and they call these things PWs, project worksheets. If you wait till after that scope of work, project worksheet is developed, it is almost impossible to get this worked in. If you don't know that little tidbit of information, you're out. You're out of, and I'm going to show you how much money this state has used in this program. It is very, very important. So just write down 406, underline, underline, underline. You want somebody in your county to understand how 406 works. Without you knowing this and without you pushing that button, you don't get this. And you could do amazing things with 87.5% free. The other 12.5% you could have in-kind labor force accounts to do it. And you're out $0. All right, pre-disaster mitigation program, the PDM program. This program is funded, it's not funded, it's funded, it's not funded. Right now, it's not funded. I guarantee you it will be. It is a pot of money that allows you, before the storm hits, doesn't matter if you're declared a presidential disaster declaration or not, this is money available prior to a storm that you can request, make a grant application. If it's approved, you can do everything that you could normally do under the other two programs I just talked about, but you can do it before the event. A little bit harder to get this pot of money. It's competitive. You're competing with others for this pot of money. The state will send out a notice of availability of funds. When that notice comes, you then generate an application. A lot of people just go to their LMS and pick whatever project and turn it into an application for this pot. Many people get this money in our state. The state gets its fair share, believe me. If the program exists, the state of Florida will get it's more money than any other state in the nation for this, which means more money for you. There are some stipulations, that's what they are. FEMA will give you up to $3 million for a project. What they like to do is keep them under $1 million to make the money go around better. Some states even cut it down to $500,000, but that's still a nice piece of change that you could use to affect it. But just to make you aware, this program exists. There is a funding cycle. It's noticed. That notice normally comes to your emergency management office, and they can or cannot. It's a lot of people tell me it's more work than worth, but if you don't venture for something, what are you going to get? Nothing. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So it's worth trying. Some people keep submitting the same application year after year after year until finally it gets funded. And I've seen that happen quite a few times. All right, the reason I'm here is this program. This is a nice little program, residential construction mitigation program. The $2 and $4 that you guys pay on your insurance policies. If you're a business, your business pays $4 a year. Private people, have you ever seen that insurance offset on your private insurance policy for $2 a year? every one of you pay $2 on your home insurance policy. If you have a home and you have home insurance, you pay $2 a year into the state of Florida, okay? That money gathers up, and in order to keep it tax-free, the state negotiated with the IRS and said, we will set up a $10 million a year program out of these proceeds to do mitigation work. That is what funds this program. That is the Residential Construction Mitigation Program. It comes out of the surcharge that's generated on the insurance policies that we all pay. It also pays for a hefty portion of emergency management. They get a nice little chunk of change out of this program as well. Every county gets the same amount. It's divvied up. But this is a good little source of money. You can apply for this. It has a funding cycle. Again, the cycle is noticed. It is only for wind mitigation. That's why I can't talk to you about flood here today. There's a whole other world out here for flood mitigation. But I can only talk about wind because that is what this program pays for, just for wind mitigation. The state limits you to $150,000 per application. What I have seen other communities do with this money, they'll go in and do the mobile home tie downs. They will go in and retrofit substandard housing. They will somehow try to get it up to code from wind, windows, roofs, whatever. I've seen this money used a variety of different ways, and it spreads around quite a bit. It's every year. It's never been not funded because it has to be funded or else the IRS will tax the state for the insurance trust fund. Here are this year's award winners. Cocoa, Melbourne, Northwest Florida Rebuild, that was set up after Hurricane Ivan as a private nonprofit to help people rebuild their homes. Bay County, Town of Davie, Tamarack, Hardy County. Whoa, you all got some. Okay, what did you all decide to use it for here? Anybody know? Okay. Town of Century, and just because you got it this year, that doesn't exclude you from getting it next year. Nice little program. Just be aware of it. All right, the CDBG. In a disaster, if you get CDBG funds, and everybody does, somebody in the county knows who gets the CDBG money and how it's divvied up, you can, under an emergency rule, divert that money for other purposes to mitigate a disaster cost. The state can do the same thing. The state can pull back unallocated, unobligated funds from other communities and send it towards a disaster. That's under their emergency rule provision. A lot of counties that do know about this hurry up and get their money obligated, because if it stands out there unobligated and you have a disaster, the state can come in and grab your money and send it to the disaster area. But if you are the disaster area, you would be receiving a whole lot more of this. I just make you aware of this to let you know that's how this process works. Figure out who is your CDBG grants coordinator for the county. Show them the slide and say, are you aware that this can happen? I bet you they may not even be aware of this. And say, okay, let's do a little research here. How does this work? Here's the genesis of where you start. And everything I just said is summed there. All right, the SHIP program, you all also get SHIP monies. The SHIP program also has the exact same rule. Under a declared disaster, the state SHIP administrator can issue an emergency rule. Unallocated SHIP money can be taken from non-declared counties, non-impacted counties, and diverted to impacted counties. If you've got something on the books that tells them what you want to use it for. All right, I just make you aware of it. You know, again, you've got to have a disaster for this one to work. but it's there, and you can use it for wind mitigation if you wanted to. It's run through the Florida Housing Foundation, which is a quasi-state entity. Weatherization program has come and gone, but I've heard rumblings that it's going to be reauthorized. It was one of the incentive programs. The state got approximately $100 million in this program that you may or may not have even been aware of. It was designed to bring low substandard housing to go in and do an assessment of what would it take to bring that housing up to code. Now, when I tell you where the money came from, you'll understand why. It came from the Department of Energy. So the goal of the money was to bring it up to an energy efficiency code. Well, to do that, that's also going to help you with wind mitigation too, isn't it? What are some of the things they would do? Well, they would fix the holes in the roof. They would put a better door in the door frame up. They would put windows and window frames in that would withstand wind. All under the banner of energy efficiency, but at the same time it's given you a wind mitigation impact. It's at $0 right now, but already I've heard that this program will probably be reauthorized, probably not at $100 million, but it will come back. So just be aware if you hear about it. The average homeowner could have gotten up to $5,600 under the old program. The average award statewide was $2,600. And we, as the consultant to the state entity that ran this, we were the ones who went in for the state and validated that the work had indeed been done and that you just didn't get the money and go buy a color TV. We validated the fact that you did indeed fix your home. All right? All right, these are the levels of funding last year / this year. RCMP for grants had $3.5 million. The pre-disaster mitigation had $40 million. Probably the state of that $40 million, the state probably got about $5 or $6 million of that nationally. The weatherization was $175 million. HMGP was $450 million. 406 could have been more than that, but comes in at a paltry $117 million. And that's y'all's fault because you didn't know how to go after it. I wish I worked at the county level because if I were the EM director, I would be grabbing every dollar I could get under this program because I don't want to say it's a windfall. It's there for a reason and a purpose, but it is sorely underused. CDBG, SHIP, and HOME. All of these are at a glance, all the programs you can dip into. This is the 406 mitigation. This is that pot of money that I was telling you about. These are the storms, statewide totals. It generated $117 million. It could have been double, triple that, in my assessment. And it could have been 87.5% free to you. The other programs, this is the 404. This is the first program I talked to you about. This is one where I said you take 20% of people, infrastructure, and SBA times 20% equals a pot of money. That's this pot of money. That is totally dependent on the disaster. So that is the number you get. There's no up or down on that one, unlike the one I just showed you. But again, almost half $500 million that were made available to local communities to mitigate. All right? You can leverage HMGP monies to do whatever it is you want to do. Lee County got real creative, for an example, and they looked at doing some flood mitigation along their main boulevard over there. So they grabbed their HMGP money, 1.2 million. They went to the Water Management District. They gave them 100 or 20K. The city kicks in 20K. Impacts fee kick in 81. Gas tax 81. Generated a working capital pot of 1.2 million. I'm telling you, you can leverage these funds. They don't have to be just an HMGP program, but it had to mitigate something for them to be able to use the mitigation money. What did that project mitigate? It mitigated flooding on a major thoroughfare. So they were able to grab mitigation dollars. Now that's a flood example, but you could do the same thing for a wind example, okay? These are the actual for Hurricane Faye. Let's see where you are, if you got some of this. Hardy County, you got $126,000. Your match requirement was $42,000. That was Faye. You know, hey, 126 plus 42, that's what, $170,000 you got to do something with, okay? And I wanted to just show you, just so you don't think I'm just preaching to the wind here. These are real hard dollars. These are real hard programs. Here are some other allocations that have happened for other declarations that we've had in the state. And again, I just put it in here just to prove to people that this money is real. Is your county getting its fair share? All right, all of the stuff I just showed you, you can go to that website and find it, and much, much more. And it's in your slides, it's in your packet, it's on your slide, so you don't have to write it down, you've already got it. All right, in state statute, there are things you can do. You're not interested in the coastal construction control line. The Florida Building Code, you all are very aware of that. We had quite an interesting conversation about that earlier.
Yeah, I got to tell you that.
I know. Just how far do you go? We're using the example of a neighbor's shed having to be bolted down so it didn't impact his neighbor. Where's common sense? These are the wind loads that you're supposed to build to. Where are you guys? You're in the green, so you're at 150 mile per hour. All right, will you ever get 150 mile an hour winds here? Yeah. How often? About once every 300 years. You're more likely to get a Charlie type of event. You'll get that maybe about every 10 years. Most coastal counties, the prediction is every 3 years. But I put it up there. It's there. It's all about wind. Success stories. This is to the south of you, southeast of you, Delray Beach. This is where they took out the windows and replaced them and put glazing on them. This glazing stuff does pretty good. It will not necessarily prevent the window from cracking, but what it does do, it prevents it from shattering and failing. So you still have the protection. You don't have a hole that the wind can go in and jack your roof up. And here's just real life examples around our state that it's actually happened. Those of you watching by video, you're going to see and hear actual people talk about their mitigation projects. Tampa Bay General, what they did there, they did all of the glazing on the windows. They went up on the roof and secured and tied everything down. They got rid of the P-rock on the roof. It's a major employer, 1,700 employees work there. They wanted that place to be secure. One, they didn't want to have to evacuate the people, which is a nightmare. If you ever tried to evacuate special needs people, that's huge. That is a big undertaking. So they mitigated this structure to make it more wind resistant. Conclusion, everybody is going to get wind impacts. And I appreciate the decision makers in both counties being here to hear this, because somebody in your respective areas needs to understand this. If they weren't here today, give them the slideshow and say, what's up? We need to at least be aware that when the opportunity comes, we can jump on it. All right, you're not going to need this every day, but if you need it, at least you'll have a basic understanding that these things are out there and you can do something with it. When I talked about your local mitigation strategy, if that was Greek to you, get up to speed on what is that. Who is it here in Hardee and DeSoto County? Who deals with the local mitigation strategy? Have that chairman brief you on the plan and what the current project listing is in that plan.
We're at the main entrance to Deep Creek Elementary School here in Port Charlotte. This is one of our 12 school buildings where mitigation dollars have been utilized to put in lightning arresters, also to reinforce the roof systems, and to add window protection and door protection from windborne debris. These dollars are well spent, and that these schools that were not destroyed by Hurricane Charlie will stand up to the next hurricane that comes our way. Every window opening has been protected with hinged coverings. These are by code because the windows of this school do open and close. And to allow egress from the building, they're on hinges so that should there be a reason, the windows can be raised and the hinged coverings can be kicked out. But these are protective. They will withstand flying debris over 130 miles per hour. And that is significant because that's what keeps the windows intact, keeps the wind out, and reduces the uplift pressures, which is what destroys buildings in hurricanes. Without question, this is in microcosm showing the value of mitigation right here, because we know that these buildings are now substantially stronger than they've ever been before. Through the roof retrofit and also through these window and door protections that have been added, these schools will withstand just about anything Mother Nature can throw at them.
Check your project list. It's also an excellent source of information for any new commissioners or especially new to this community or county of all the natural hazards you'll be susceptible to. Be a part of that committee if you can. It's always good to have as high a level of decision maker on those committees as they can possibly twist arms to get on them. Most times, 99% of the time, it's staff people that staff this thing. And then when the rubber hits the road and it's time to invoke these programs, without having commissioners in meetings like this, you come in saying, well, why can't we go do this and that? So-and-so, go make that happen. Well, no, I can't do that because the program doesn't allow that. And you weren't in the hearing, in the briefing, so you could understand what is or is not eligible. So having you here has been tremendously, it's going to help your county's emergency management folks out a lot because now you know what they know and you know what to go for. Those are the two people. If you have further questions, that's the website. The two people, Eric Poole is the guy with the Florida Association of Counties. If you call him, he's going to call me and then I'm going to return your call. If you call the state who controls all the money, that's who you want to talk to, Miles Anderson. He has my old job. He's the current Bureau Chief of Mitigation. They split my old bureau up. When I left, they split my old group into recovery and to mitigation. When I was there, I had them both. But now there's a Chief of Recovery and the Chief of Mitigation. The current Chief of Mitigation is Miles Anderson. And that's his contact number, and he encourages people to call him, to ask questions, to make sure that you understand eligibility. If you're interested in going after some of this, how do you do it? Who should do it? How much work is it really worth? Is it really worth our time to do it? He can tell you all that kind of stuff.